Hi, I'm Rachel, and this is my long weekend, mid-July 2018 reading update. I wanted to make a reading update now because I'm going to be gone on vacation for the next week, and so I didn't want to leave you without sharing my plans about what I'll be reading on vacation and updating on what I've read since my last update, and thankfully I did read something, so huzzah. I wanted to take a moment too to thank everyone who left me birthday wishes on my last video. It was very thoughtful and thank you so much. I ended up going home to my parents' house in Baltimore, and my aunts were in town. Really, they were in town to visit my nephew, who was a couple months old. But it happened to fall also on my birthday, so I got a little love as well. And my cousin and his wife, they came down from New York, or technically on their way home to New York. They've been traveling, so I got to see a bunch of people that I don't usually get to see. My aunts are in Kansas, and my cousin and his wife are in New York, and I'm in the DC area, so it was all good. And I got a picture of me and my niece and my nephew, and I'd been wanting that for a while too. And also my cat is running around like a crazy cat right now, in case you hear noise in the background. And final little funny story I'll tell about my birthday is that I had a brief FaceTime conversation with my uncle, and my niece was there as well. She's about 4 years old, and so my niece Grace is starting to put together the pieces, I guess, about how we're all related to each other. So she tells my uncle, "You know Aunt Rachel too?" And my uncle says to her, "I've known Aunt Rachel for many, many years." And then Grace thinks for a second and she says, "You've known Aunt Rachel since she was a seed?" Oh my gosh, it was so funny and so fascinating too to see how her mind works. Okay, so on to my read of the weekend. I just finally finished this book. This is Jen Campbell's book. She has a very popular YouTube channel about fairy tales and other literary and personal pursuits. And this is her debut short story collection, very much based upon folklore and fairy tales, and has a magical realist tint. And like a lot of other people, I really enjoyed this collection. There's a couple stories that are sticking out in my head right now. Aunt Libby's Coffin Hotel, I think, had the most amount of world building in it. I mean, the other stories were also, all of them were very intriguing, but this one was one of the longer ones, and sort of had the most fortification to it. But it was very atmospheric. It was about this woman who owns a hotel where people try to commune with death if they have fears of death, and they stay in coffins at night, and they're on an island, and the island is made up to sort of be haunted and atmospheric, and some of it is definitely a bit of false pretense, I suppose, and make-believe on the part of the owners to beef up the experience. But then there is another part of the story that is more real and spooky, and has that underbelly to it as well. And then on the opposite end, there's Little Deaths, which was one of the shorter, sort of least, fortified, I guess, stories, because he only had a couple of pages to tell it, but it had such a great atmosphere to it. And in this story, people sort of gave birth to ghosts whenever they had a high emotional output, and there's all this mythology in the story that builds up about why this is happening, and it's obviously, like the other story, Jen Campbell communing with the idea of what death means, and how people deal with the unknown of it. So I really enjoyed that as well. And I enjoyed the titular story. It was actually a play. I feel like I'm spoiling something that hasn't been spoiled for me, although I've been hearing about this book for a while. And another story was an epistolatory story, and so she had a nice range in here. Everything was first person. I think it's a style that works for her well. And yeah, I'm very glad that I read this. It was a good experience. Anyway, my reading list for this week is predicated by the fact that I am going on vacation. I am going across the country to San Diego Comic-Con. It is a humongous science fiction, fantasy, and comics and gaming, genre sort of convention. And I've gone a couple of times. My major reason for going is that I have friends in the area who love going to the convention as well, so it's a nice chance to get to see them and also get to embrace my inner geek. This year, a lot of the programming that interests me actually is book related, which I guess isn't that surprising because I've been getting more and more into book culture. A lot of it is actually YA authors. There's some adult science fiction and fantasy authors who are there as well, but I guess I don't read as many popular people in the adult genres. I don't know, Becky Chambers, A Record of a Spaceborne Few is coming out next week. I don't know why you're skipping out on Comic-Con. But anyway, so my reading will be confined to the airplane rides over and across the country, and then waiting in lines, which is another big part of Comic-Con. 2 years ago when I went last, I actually read this book, which is pretty huge, but it's a YA contemporary book called Me Being Me is Exactly as Insane as You Being You, and it's a book that's told in lists, so it was actually really quick reading. It was really easy to put up and down quickly, so it went a lot faster than it might have. And it was an okay, mediocre sort of book, but it sort of did the trick while I was there, and I still have it here in my house, even though I'm supposed to have gotten rid of it by now. I have a whole bunch of books I should be getting rid of, but anyway. So for this Comic-Con, I thought I might focus on interconnected short stories. I thought that might be the best of both worlds, because I thought maybe the stories would be short, but that they'd be connected enough that I wouldn't have to enter a new world all the time, which is kind of exhausting, especially when you're running around a huge convention. That being said, I think the interconnected short stories I have in mind are a bit longer, story by story than I would have thought. So I don't know if this will work, but I'll bring them and maybe at least try to read them on the plane if I'm not, falling asleep. But here they are. This is 3 Floors Up by Eshkol Nevo. I got it a couple of months ago at Solid State Books, which is an indie bookstore in DC. I went there for Independent Bookstore Day in April, and this was on my Jewish fiction published in English in 2017 list, because Eshkol Nevo is a Hebrew-speaking author, and Sondra Silverston is the translator. I had to look that up. Anyway, I'll read from the flap. Arnon, a retired officer tormented by his experience fighting in the First Intifada, lives with his family on the first floor. His marriage is in peril. He reaches out to an old army friend, recounting how his obsessive concern for his young daughter's safety led him to lose control. Above Arnon lives Hani, known as the Widow, whose husband travels the world for his lucrative job while she stays at home with their 2 children, increasingly isolated and unstable. When her brother-in-law suddenly appears at their door begging her to hide him from the loan sharks and the police, she agrees in spite of the risk to her family, if only to bring some excitement into her life. On the top floor, a recently retired judge, Devora, remains in the apartment she shared with her late husband. Keenly feeling his absence and trying to reconnect with her estranged son, she joins a social movement that introduces her to a charismatic man who isn't what he seems. In these 3 skillfully woven narratives, Eshkol Nevo vividly depicts the grinding effects of social and political ills played out in the psyches of his flawed, compelling characters in often unexpected and explosive ways. So yeah, there's a simple conceit to this story about 3 people living in an apartment building, like stacked on top of each other, and I know it's kind of silly, but I felt like that was too good for me to resist, how to use that as a connection between the people. So I love the idea of flawed, complicated characters, so huzzah! And finally, I have this collection of stories, You May See a Stranger by Paula Whyman, and I believe all of the stories revolve around a particular protagonist jumping around different points of her life. I actually read this story in my Try a Short Story tag from last year. It didn't win, but I wanted to get to it now. You know, the one that won this year that I did a couple weeks ago was the Jen Campbell collection that I just showed you. But anyway, I'm kind of wondering if maybe I should read this collection on my way home, because all of these stories take place in the DC area, or at least the character and the author are from DC, and I actually went to a reading that she did at the Writers Center in Bethesda, Maryland, so that was pretty fun. So that about covers it for me now. I kind of have my eyes a little bit to this angle where my cat, for the moment, seems to be sitting semi-quietly, but I feel like she could jump up in crazy town any moment now. I'm feeling a little sad because this is the first time that I'll be leaving her for such an extended amount of time, and I've only had her for under a month. But I'm so excited to be going to the convention, and I plan to bring along my camera and to shoot some of the writerly panels and things, you know, because BookTube has gotten into my blood now, and hopefully I'll compile something that's good and juicy for all of you. And I'll be back here at least by like the 23rd or the 24th to recount my reading and other exploits. Thanks so much for watching, everyone, and I'll see you next time.